She always knew she was different. Even as a little kid, she stood a head taller than everyone else in her class photos. By the time she hit middle school, she was already 5'9". The boys hadn't caught up yet, and she felt like a giant walking through the hallways. Her mom tried to make her feel better. "You have model height, sweetie," she'd say while looking up at her daughter. "But when you're 13 and towering over every single person at the school dance, being told you could be a model doesn't really help. It just makes you feel more different. High school was supposed to be better." People always say that. They say kids mature, they grow up, they stop caring about silly things. But that's not exactly what happened. Sure, some of the guys finally hit their growth spurts. A few even got taller than her. But the damage was already done. She'd spent years feeling awkward and out of place, and that feeling doesn't just go away overnight. She learned to slouch. Not a lot, just enough to take off an inch or two. She wore flat shoes exclusively. Even when all her friends were wearing heels to prom, she avoided standing too close to guys in group photos. These became habits, little things she did without even thinking about them anymore. College gave her a fresh start, or at least she hoped it would. She went to a big state university where nobody knew her as that really tall girl from physics class. She stopped slouching mostly. She even bought a pair of small heels once, though they sat in her closet unworn for 2 years before she donated them. But dating in college was weird too. Guys would match with her on apps, chat for days, seem really interested, and then suddenly ghost after meeting in person. Or they'd make comments. "Wow, you really are tall. Do you play basketball? My ex was like 5'2", so this is different." As if she needed the reminder that she wasn't what they expected. By the time she graduated and started working as a physical therapist, she'd been on maybe 3 real dates. 3. Her roommate from college had been in 2 serious relationships and was engaged by 24. Meanwhile, she was helping patients recover from injuries, building a career she loved, living in a nice apartment, and eating dinner alone most nights. At 25, she decided enough was enough. She wasn't going to let her height define her anymore. She was smart, funny, good at her job, and a genuinely kind person. There had to be someone out there who could see past the fact that she was 6'2" and bare feet. Someone who wouldn't measure himself against her or make her feel like she needed to apologize for taking up space. So she updated her dating profile. She picked good photos, ones where she was smiling naturally. She wrote honestly about her interests, her love for hiking and old movies and trying new restaurants. And right there in her bio, she put her height. No hiding it, no waiting until the first date to drop that bomb. If someone had a problem with it, they could swipe left and save everyone the trouble. Her friends were supportive. "You're going to find someone," they promised. "The right guy won't care." And she wanted to believe them. She really did. But after years of rejection and awkward encounters and guys who seemed interested until they actually met her, it was hard to feel optimistic. Still, she tried. She set up her profile, took a deep breath, and started swiping. Within a few days, she had several matches. A few seemed promising. They were chatting, making jokes, and actually seemed interested in getting to know her. One guy even suggested meeting up for coffee that weekend. She agreed, picked out a casual outfit, and showed up 15 minutes early because she's always early to everything. She ordered a latte, found a table near the window, and waited. When he walked in and spotted her, she saw it immediately. That little flicker of surprise, that moment of hesitation. He smiled and walked over, but she'd already seen it. She'd seen it before, and she knew exactly what it meant. They had coffee anyway. He was polite enough. Asked about her work, talked about his job in marketing, laughed at the right moments. But the whole time she could feel it. That distance. That sense that he was already mentally checked out, just going through the motions until he could politely excuse himself. When they said goodbye outside the coffee shop, he said he'd text her. He never did. And she wasn't surprised. Not really. Just disappointed again. But she didn't give up. Not yet. She had friends who'd gone on dozens of dates before meeting their partners. Maybe she just needed to keep trying. Maybe the next one would be different. Maybe the next guy would be the one who actually saw her, not just her height. So she kept swiping, kept matching, kept hoping that somewhere out there someone was looking for exactly who she was. Someone who wouldn't make her feel too tall, too much, too different. Someone who would just make her feel like enough. She didn't know it yet, but she was about to go through 9 more dates just like that first one. 9 more disappointments, 9 more reminders that the world wasn't always kind to women who didn't fit into neat little boxes. But she also didn't know that after all that rejection, after all that heartbreak, someone unexpected would come along and change everything. For now, though, she was just a woman trying to find love in a world that kept telling her she was too tall for it. The second date came a week later. This time she met him at a trendy little restaurant downtown. He was 5'10" according to his profile, which she'd learned meant probably 5'8" in reality. When she arrived, he was already at the table, and she could see his expression change when she walked over. That same look, surprise mixed with something else. Disappointment, maybe. They ordered food, made small talk. He told her about his job as a software developer, and she told him about the patient she'd helped walk again after a car accident. He seemed more interested in his phone than the conversation. Halfway through dinner, he excused himself to the bathroom and was gone for almost 15 minutes. When he came back, he said he wasn't feeling well and needed to head home. She paid for her own meal and drove home in silence. Date 3 was with a guy who seemed really confident online. He was 6 feet tall, had a good job, and they'd been texting for almost 2 weeks before meeting up. She had high hopes. They met at a bar for drinks, and at first everything seemed okay. He was funny, charming even. But then, as the night went on, he kept making comments. "You must have been a beast in volleyball. Bet you could kick my butt in a fight. Do you wear heels? Because that would be insane." Every comment felt like a tiny paper cut. Individually, they seemed harmless. Together, they hurt. She tried to laugh along, tried to be cool about it, but inside she was shrinking, making herself smaller. When he suggested a second date, she politely declined. He seemed confused, like he genuinely didn't understand what he'd done wrong. The fourth date never really happened. They'd agreed to meet for brunch on a Sunday morning. She showed up at the cafe, texted him that she was there, and waited. 30 minutes later, he replied saying something had come up. She saw him active on social media an hour later, posting photos from a hiking trip with friends. She ordered pancakes by herself and tried not to feel pathetic. Date 5 was almost good. Almost. He was 6'1", worked as a teacher, loved dogs, and seemed genuinely kind. They went for a walk in the park, got ice cream, talked about books and travel and their families. She thought maybe this was it. Maybe she'd finally found someone who didn't care. But at the end of the date, when he walked her to her car, he said something that stuck with her. "You're really great, but I don't know if I can date someone taller than me. I need to feel like the protector, you know? Like the man." She didn't know what to say to that. What could she say? That she'd make herself smaller? That she'd shrink to fit his idea of what a relationship should look like? Instead, she just nodded, got in her car, and drove home. That night, she sat in her bathroom and cried for 20 minutes. Not because she was heartbroken over some guy she'd known for 3 hours, but because she was tired. So tired of being told she was too much. By date 6, she'd almost given up hope. But her best friend convinced her to try one more time. "Just one more," her friend said. "You never know." So she matched with another guy, a personal trainer who was 6 feet tall and seemed really enthusiastic about meeting her. They went to dinner at an Italian place, and the conversation flowed easily. He was attractive, successful, and they had a lot in common. She started to relax, started to think maybe her friend was right. Then dessert came, and out of nowhere he leaned back in his chair and said, "Can I be honest with you?" Her stomach dropped. "Nothing good ever follows that question. You're awesome," he continued. "But I've always dated petite women. Like really small, 5 foot nothing, you know? And I guess I just prefer that dynamic. The size difference thing, it's important to me." She wanted to throw her tiramisu at him. She wanted to ask him why he'd swiped right if her height bothered him so much. She wanted to tell him that she was so much more than her measurements. But instead she just smiled tightly, finished her coffee, and went home. Again. Date 7 happened through a dating app with video chat features. They'd been messaging for a few days, and he seemed great. Funny, smart, good-looking. He suggested they video chat before meeting in person, which she thought was actually a smart idea. So one evening she set up her phone, made sure the lighting was good, and called him. They chatted for maybe 5 minutes. Normal stuff. "How was your day? What did you do this weekend? Have you seen this new show?" Then he said, "Hey, can you stand up real quick? I want to see your full outfit." She should have known better, but she stood up anyway. There was a long pause. Then he said, "Oh wow, you really are tall." And then, Hey, sorry, I just remembered I have an early meeting tomorrow. I should probably go. And he ended the call. Just like that. She stared at her phone screen for a full minute, not quite believing what had just happened. He didn't even have the decency to come up with a better excuse. Just hung up on her because she was tall. She laughed, but it wasn't a happy laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes right before crying. Date 8 was a setup from coworkers. They swore this guy was perfect for her. He was tall, successful, family-oriented, and apparently had specifically said he didn't mind dating a tall woman. She was skeptical, but agreed to meet him for drinks after work one Friday. He showed up in a nice suit, shook her hand, and they grabbed a booth at a wine bar. The conversation was fine. Not amazing, but fine. Then about halfway through their second glass of wine, he did something bizarre. He stood up and asked her to stand next to him. "Just want to check something," he said with a laugh. She stood, confused. He pulled out his phone and took a photo of them standing side by side. Then he looked at it, zoomed in, and actually measured the height difference with his fingers on the screen. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Just checking the height difference," he said casually, like this was completely normal behavior. "My brother said you can't date a woman who's within 3 inches of your height. He says it looks weird in photos." She didn't even finish her wine. She just grabbed her purse, put $20 on the table, and left. She heard him call after her, asking what was wrong, but she didn't look back. Date 9 was the worst. He'd seemed normal, maybe even sweet. They'd been texting for over a week, talking on the phone a few times, and she genuinely thought he might be different. When they met up for dinner, he was exactly like his photos. Attractive, well-dressed, polite. But as the night went on, he kept making comments about her height in ways that made her uncomfortable. "Bet you're dominant in bed with those long legs. You could probably pin me down easy. I've always wanted to be with an Amazon woman." He wasn't seeing her as a person. He was seeing her as a fetish, a fantasy, something to check off his list. When he suggested going back to his place, she declined. He got pushy, saying she was playing hard to get, and that he knew she was into it. She had to firmly tell him no 3 times before he finally backed off. She blocked his number the second she got to her car. 10 dates. She'd promised herself she'd try 10 times before giving up completely, and date 10 came from her mom's friend's nephew. "He's such a nice boy," her mom had said. "Just give him a chance." So she did. They went to a casual family dinner at his parents' house, which should have been her first red flag. Who brings a first date to meet their parents? The dinner was awkward from the start. His mom kept staring at her, kept whispering to his dad. Finally, as they were clearing plates, his mother said it, right there in the kitchen in front of everyone. "You're making my son look small. Not small in stature, small like less than, like inadequate." And he just stood there, didn't defend her, didn't say anything, just looked uncomfortable and changed the subject. She finished helping with dishes because she was raised to be polite, then made an excuse about having an early morning. She drove home with her hands gripping the steering wheel so tight her knuckles were white. She pulled into her driveway, turned off the car, and just sat there in the dark. 10 rejections. 10 different ways of being told she was too much, too tall, too different, too outside the box of what men expected or wanted or needed. She was 25 years old, successful, kind, and completely alone. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't sure if that was ever going to change. The stable was about 30 minutes outside the city, tucked away down a winding dirt road lined with oak trees. She almost turned around twice on the drive there. What if she was terrible at it? What if she fell off? What if the instructor was one of those people who made her feel awkward about her height? But she kept driving, partly because she'd promised her therapist she'd try, and partly because she'd already paid for the lesson. When she pulled into the gravel parking lot, she saw horses in the distance grazing peacefully in a large paddock. The stable itself was rustic but well-maintained, with flower boxes under the windows and a hand-painted sign that read, "Meadowbrook Stables." A woman who looked to be in her 60s came out of the barn, wiping her hands on her jeans. "You must be my 10 o'clock lesson," the woman said with a warm smile. "I'm Margaret. I own this place." They shook hands, and Margaret didn't comment on her height. Didn't give her that look. Just treated her like any other person showing up for a riding lesson. It was refreshing in a way she hadn't expected. Margaret introduced her to a gentle horse named Clover, a beautiful chestnut mare with kind eyes. "She's perfect for beginners," Margaret explained. patient, steady, and forgiving of mistakes. You two will get along just fine. Learning to ride was harder than she expected. Her long legs actually helped with mounting the horse, but finding her balance took time. She felt awkward at first, too aware of her body, worried about doing everything wrong. But Margaret was an excellent teacher, patient and encouraging, never making her feel stupid for asking questions. "You're doing great," Margaret said as she led Clover in a wide circle around the arena. "You've got good posture. A lot of tall riders do. Natural advantage." She felt something shift in her chest when Margaret said that. Natural advantage. When was the last time someone had called her height an advantage? When was the last time she'd felt like her body was working with her instead of against her? By the end of that first lesson, she was smiling. Really smiling. Not the polite smile she'd learned to paste on during awkward situations. She was sweaty and sore, and pretty sure she'd pulled a muscle in her thigh, but she felt alive in a way she hadn't in months. She booked another lesson for the following week, then another. Before she knew it, she was coming to the stable twice a week, sometimes 3 times. She learned how to trot, how to steer, how to communicate with Clover through subtle shifts in her weight and gentle pressure from her legs. She learned how to groom and tack up. She learned the names of all the horses and their different personalities. The stable became her sanctuary. When she was there, she didn't think about dating or rejection or feeling too tall. She thought about the rhythm of Clover's hooves, the smell of hay and leather, the way the late afternoon sun filtered through the trees at the edge of the property. She thought about nothing at all and everything important. Margaret became more than just an instructor. She became a mentor, a friend. They'd sit on the fence after lessons, drinking lemonade from Margaret's thermos, talking about life. Margaret told her about running the stable for 30 years, about losing her husband 5 years ago, about the joy she found in teaching people to connect with horses. "Horses don't care about any of the things humans obsess over," Margaret said one afternoon. "They don't care if you're tall or short, pretty or plain, rich or poor. They care if you're honest, if you're present, if you treat them with respect. I wish more people were like horses." She laughed at that, but she understood what Margaret meant. There was something pure about the relationship between human and horse. Something simple. You showed up, you did the work, you built trust. No games, no pretense, no measuring yourself against impossible standards. Therapy was helping too. She was learning to identify the negative thoughts that crept in, the ones that told her she was too much or not enough. She was learning to challenge them, to ask herself if they were really true or just old stories she'd been telling herself for too long. Her therapist introduced her to the concept of radical acceptance, not just accepting things you can't change, but embracing them, finding power in them. "You can't change your height," her therapist said, "but you can change how you feel about it. You can choose to see it as a problem, or you can choose to see it as part of what makes you unique." It wasn't an overnight transformation. Some days she still caught herself slouching. Some days she still felt that familiar pang of insecurity when she walked past a mirror. But more and more she was having good days. Days where she stood tall without thinking about it. Days where she felt comfortable in her own skin. She stopped following certain accounts on social media, the ones that made her feel bad about herself. She unfollowed the fitness influencers who were all 5 foot nothing. She unfollowed the fashion bloggers who only posted petite styling tips. Instead, she found accounts run by tall women who celebrated their height, who wore heels without apology, who took up space unapologetically. She also started doing things she'd avoided for years. She wore a dress with a shorter hemline, even though it showed off her long legs. She stood in the front row at a concert instead of hiding in the back. She stopped making self-deprecating jokes about her height when meeting new people. Small changes, but they added up. Her coworkers noticed the shift. "You seem different lately," one of them said over lunch. "More confident or something. What's your secret?" She thought about how to answer that. Was it the therapy, the horseback riding, the 8 months of being single and learning to be okay with it? Maybe it was all of those things. "I'm just learning to like myself," she said finally. "All of myself. Even the parts I used to think were problems." 6 months into her riding lessons, Margaret offered her a part-time position at the stable. Nothing fancy, just helping out on weekends, feeding horses, mucking stalls, assisting with lessons. The pay was minimal, but she said yes immediately. It meant more time at the place that had become her refuge. More time with the horses that had taught her to be present. More time with Margaret, who'd become the grandmother she'd lost too early. Working at the stable was hard physical labor, but she loved it. She loved the routine of it, the simplicity. She loved how tired she felt at the end of the day, the good kind of tired that comes from honest work. She loved the smell of the barn, the sound of horses nickering for their breakfast, the way the stable cats would wind around her ankles while she worked. She made friends with the other riders, people from all walks of life who shared this common love of horses. There was a teenager training for competitions, a retired police officer who rode for therapy, a mom who brought her kids for lessons every Saturday. They formed a little community, and in that community, she felt like she belonged. 8 months after deleting her dating apps, she was a different person. Not completely healed, not perfect, but better, stronger. She'd learned that she didn't need a relationship to validate her existence. She'd learned that being alone wasn't the same as being lonely. She'd learned that sometimes the person you need to fall in love with first is yourself. She was content, maybe even happy. She had her work at the clinic, her lessons at the stable, her therapy sessions, her friends. She had a life that felt full and meaningful without a romantic relationship in it. And for the first time since those 10 failed dates, she genuinely believed that if love never came, she'd still be okay. She had no way of knowing that love was about to show up anyway. Not in a coffee shop or on a dating app or at a bar, but in the place she least expected it when she'd finally stopped looking. Sometimes that's how it works. You spend so long searching for something, and the moment you stop searching, it finds you instead. It was a regular Saturday morning at the stable. She showed up early like always, ready to help feed the horses before the first lessons of the day. Margaret was waiting in the barn with her coffee, like always. But this time she wasn't alone. Standing next to her, holding his own mug of coffee and wearing well-worn boots and a cowboy hat, was someone she'd never seen before. "Good morning," Margaret said with a knowing smile. "I want you to meet someone." She deleted all her dating apps the next morning. Every single one. She didn't even hesitate, just opened each app, found the delete account button, and watched them disappear from her phone one by one. It felt both terrifying and freeing at the same time, like jumping off a diving board, that moment of free fall before you hit the water. Her friends noticed. Of course they did. They'd been following her dating journey, cheering her on, offering support after each failed attempt. When she told them she was done, they tried to encourage her to keep trying. "The right person is out there," they said. "You just haven't found him yet. Maybe try a different app?" What about speed dating? But she was exhausted. Not just physically tired, though the emotional roller coaster of dating had definitely worn her out. She was exhausted in her soul, tired of putting herself out there only to be rejected, tired of feeling like she had to apologize for something she couldn't control, tired of measuring her worth by whether or not some random guy swiped right. For the first few weeks, she felt relieved. She went to work, came home, watched TV, read books, and didn't think about dating at all. She deleted the group chat where her friends had been giving her pep talks about her dates. She stopped going to the wine bars and coffee shops where she'd met those guys. She created a little bubble for herself, and in that bubble she felt safe. But then the loneliness started creeping in. Not the desperate, painful kind that makes you text your ex at 2 a.m. It was quieter than that. It was eating dinner alone and wishing someone was there to share it with. It was seeing couples holding hands at the grocery store and feeling a pang in her chest. It was her younger cousin getting engaged and everyone asking her when she'd settle down, as if it was just a matter of deciding to do it. The worst part was the self-doubt. Late at night, when she couldn't sleep, her mind would spiral. Maybe those guys were right. Maybe she was too tall. Maybe she should have tried harder to make herself smaller, more palatable, easier to digest. Maybe the problem wasn't them. Maybe it was her. She'd catch herself slouching again at work, standing with her weight shifted to one hip, trying to take up less space. She'd avoid standing too close to her male coworkers during meetings. She started wearing only flat shoes again, even though she'd bought a pair of cute boots with a small heel that she never wore. Her mom called one Sunday afternoon, the way moms do when they sense something's wrong. They talked about nothing for a while, just catching up on family gossip and work stories. Then her mom asked the question she'd been dreading. "Have you been seeing anyone lately?" She could have lied, could have made up some story about being too busy with work, but instead she found herself telling her mom everything. All 10 dates, all 10 rejections. The video call that ended abruptly, The guy who measured their height difference. The one who fetishized her. The mother who said she made her son look small. All of it came pouring out like water from a broken dam. Her mom was quiet for a long time. Then she said something unexpected. You know, when I was young, I always wished I was taller. I thought tall women were so elegant, so graceful. Your grandmother used to tell me I was perfect just the way I was, but I never believed her. Now here you are, with this beautiful height, and the world is making you feel bad about it. That breaks my heart. They both cried on the phone, just sat there miles apart, sharing this moment of grief for all the ways society tells women they're not enough. Too tall, too short, too fat, too thin, too loud, too quiet. Always too something. After they hung up, she looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. She was 6'2". She had strong shoulders from years of swimming, long legs that carried her through marathon training, a face that her grandmother always said was striking. When had she started seeing all of these things as problems instead of gifts? That night she couldn't sleep. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, thinking about those 10 dates. About all the men who'd made her feel small even though she was tall. About how much energy she'd spent trying to fit into their expectations. About how exhausted she was from contorting herself into something she wasn't. At 3 a.m, she got up and wrote in her journal. Just stream of consciousness thoughts and feelings. She wrote about being 12 years old and slouching for the first time. About the high school dance where she stood against the wall all night because no boy would dance with her. About her college roommate who used to borrow her clothes and roll the pants up 5 inches. About every single moment when her height had made her feel like an outsider. But she also wrote about the good things. About being able to reach the top shelf without a step stool. About never losing her friends in a crowd. About the little girl at the clinic who'd told her she looked like a superhero. About her niece who always asked to measure herself against her aunt, hoping to be tall too someday. About standing at the edge of the Grand Canyon and feeling like she could touch the sky. By the time the sun came up, she'd filled 20 pages. Her hand hurt from writing, but her chest felt lighter. She made coffee, sat on her balcony, and watched the world wake up. And she made a decision, not to give up on love exactly, but to give up on looking for it. To stop measuring her worth by whether or not someone wanted to date her, to just exist as herself and see what happened. She called her best friend that morning. I think I need help, she admitted. Like professional help. Therapy or something. Her friend didn't hesitate. I think that's a really good idea. I actually have a therapist I love. Want me to send you her information? A week later, she was sitting in a sunny office with plants in every corner, talking to a woman who didn't seem fazed by anything. She told her about the dates, about feeling too tall, about not knowing if she'd ever find someone, and her therapist just nodded and said, "Tell me about the first time you remember feeling too tall." That was the beginning, not of finding love, not yet, but of finding herself, of learning that the problem wasn't her height. It was the world's inability to accept it. And more importantly, it was her own inability to accept herself. The dates hadn't rejected her. She'd rejected herself first, and they'd just followed her lead. Therapy wasn't easy. Some sessions left her feeling raw and exposed. But slowly, week by week, she started to change. Not physically. She was still 6'2". But internally, something was shifting. She was learning to stand tall in more ways than one. She was learning that she didn't need to shrink to make other people comfortable. She was learning that the right person wouldn't ask her to. 3 months into therapy, her therapist gave her homework. This week, I want you to do something that makes you feel powerful in your body. Something that reminds you how strong and capable you are. She thought about it for days. Then she remembered something she'd seen on social media weeks ago. A local stable offering horseback riding lessons. She'd always wanted to try it but never had. The next day, she called and signed up for her first lesson. She had no idea that this decision, this simple choice to try something new, was about to change everything. The man standing next to Margaret was tall. Really tall. Even with his weathered cowboy hat on, she could tell he had a few inches on her. He had that lean, sturdy build that comes from years of physical work, not from a gym. His face was tanned and lined in a way that suggested he spent most of his time outdoors. And when he smiled at her, the corners of his eyes crinkled. "This is my nephew," Margaret said. "He just moved here from Wyoming to help me run the place, going to be taking over some of the lessons and training." He took off his hat and extended his hand. "Nice to meet you. Margaret's told me a lot about you. Says you've got a real natural way with the horses. She shook his hand, noticing the calluses, the strong grip. She's being generous. I'm still learning. Aren't we all? He said with an easy smile, putting his hat back on. I've been riding since before I could walk, and I'm still learning something new every time I'm in the saddle. There was something immediately comfortable about him. He didn't have that performative confidence some men had, where they needed everyone to know how impressive they were. He was just solid, present, real. And he looked her directly in the eye when he spoke, not at her height, not up and down her body, just at her, like a regular person talking to another regular person. Margaret excused herself to take a phone call, leaving them alone in the barn aisle. For a moment, they just stood there, and she felt that familiar awkwardness starting to creep in. But then one of the horses, an older gelding named Copper, stuck his head over his stall door and nickered at them. "Someone wants breakfast," he said, walking over to scratch Copper's forehead. "Margaret mentioned you help with morning feeding?" "Yeah. I'm usually here most weekend mornings." "Well then, how about you show me the routine? I'm going to need to learn how things work around here." They fell into an easy rhythm, working side by side to feed all 12 horses. He asked questions about each one, their personalities, their quirks, their dietary needs. He listened when she talked, really listened, asking follow-up questions that showed he was paying attention. When they got to Clover's stall, she introduced them. "This is my girl," she said, running her hand down Clover's neck. "Margaret paired us up on my first day, and we've been partners ever since." He studied Clover with an appreciative eye. "She's a good one. You can tell by the way she's watching you. See how her ears are forward, how relaxed she is? That's a horse that trusts her person." Something about the way he said it made her chest feel warm. Not in a romantic way exactly. More like the feeling of being understood, of having someone recognize something important to you. They finished the feeding and moved on to mucking stalls. It wasn't glamorous work, but he didn't complain. Just grabbed a pitchfork and got to it. They worked in companionable silence for a while, just the sound of work and horses and birds singing outside the barn. "So what brought you out from Wyoming?" she asked eventually, dumping a wheelbarrow full of soiled bedding into the manure pile. "Aunt Margaret needed help," he said simply. "She's not getting any younger, though don't tell her I said that. And after my dad passed last year, I was ready for a change of scenery. Seemed like good timing for both of us." "I'm sorry about your dad." "Thanks, he lived a good life. Ran our family ranch until the day he died just the way he wanted." He paused, leaning on his pitchfork. "What about you? What brought you to horses?" She thought about how to answer that. The whole truth felt like too much to share with someone she'd just met. "I needed something that got me out of my own head," she said finally. "Horses are good for that." He nodded like he understood exactly what she meant. "They are. Can't think about anything else when you're riding. Have to be right there in the moment with them. It's like meditation, but better." The first lesson students started arriving around 9. She usually helped Margaret get the horses ready, but today, he took over most of the teaching. She watched from the fence as he worked with a young girl who was nervous about cantering. He was patient and encouraging, never pushing too hard, always making sure both horse and rider felt safe. "You're doing great," she heard him tell the girl. "Trust your horse. She knows what she's doing. Just breathe and stay with her." Between lessons, they'd end up chatting about random things. He told her about growing up on the ranch, learning to ride before he learned to read, helping his dad with cattle drives and fence mending and all the endless work that comes with ranch life. She told him about her work as a physical therapist, about helping people regain their strength and mobility, about the satisfaction of seeing someone walk without pain for the first time in months. "That must be rewarding work," he said, refilling his water bottle from the barn faucet. "Helping people like that." "It is. Kind of like what you do here, actually. Helping people connect with horses, building their confidence. It's all about trust and patience." He smiled at that. "Never thought about it that way, but you're right." As the day went on, she realized something strange. She hadn't thought about her height once. Not when they were working side by side. Not when they were talking. not when they were standing next to each other. For the first time in as long as she could remember, her height just wasn't a thing. It wasn't good or bad. It just was. Around noon, Margaret invited them both to lunch at her house next to the stable. They sat on her back porch, eating sandwiches and drinking sweet tea, talking about the plans for the stable. Margaret wanted to expand the lesson program, maybe add some trail riding experiences. He had ideas from his ranch experience, talking about how they could make the most of the property. She mostly listened, enjoying the easy back and forth between aunt and nephew. There was clear love there and respect. It reminded her of her relationship with her own grandmother before she'd passed. That comfortable familiarity that comes from shared history and genuine affection. "Well," Margaret said after lunch, "I've got paperwork to do. Why don't you two go ride? Show him the trails out back. He should know the property if he's going to be leading trail rides eventually." Before she could come up with an excuse, he was already standing up. "That's a great idea. If you're up for it?" She was. Of course she was. So they tacked up their horses, her on Clover and him on a big bay gelding named Ranger, and headed out onto the trails that wound through the woods behind the stable. Riding next to him was easy. He wasn't one of those riders who needed to show off, always pushing ahead or doing unnecessary things to prove their skill. He just rode quiet and competent, letting Ranger pick his way along the trail while making conversation. They talked about everything and nothing. Favorite movies, worst camping experiences, the best meal they'd ever eaten, places they wanted to travel. It was the kind of conversation that felt natural, unforced, like talking to someone you'd known for years instead of hours. At one point, they stopped at a clearing where you could see for miles, all rolling hills and autumn colors. They dismounted, to let the horses rest and drink from a small creek. "This is beautiful," he said, looking out at the view. "Different from Wyoming. The mountains out there, you feel small in a good way. This is more gentle, but just as pretty." "What do you miss most about it?" she asked. He thought about it. "The space, I guess. The big sky. You can see the stars like nowhere else, but I'm not homesick if that's what you're asking. Sometimes change is exactly what you need, even when it's hard." She understood that. Change was hard, but sometimes staying the same was harder. They rode back as the sun was starting to lower in the sky, painting everything golden. When they got back to the barn and were untacking the horses, he said, "Thanks for showing me around today, and for the company. Moving somewhere new can be lonely." "I know what you mean," she said. And she did. As she drove home that evening, she realized she was smiling. Not because she thought anything was going to happen with him. Not because she was reading into anything or getting her hopes up. Just because she'd had a genuinely good day. She'd met someone kind and easy to talk to. She'd spent time with horses. She'd been herself, completely herself. And it had felt effortless. That night, she wrote in her journal like she did most nights now. And for the first time in months, she found herself writing about meeting someone new, not with the anxiety and hope that used to accompany those entries, just with curiosity and contentment. Whatever happened next, she'd be okay. That was the difference now. She'd finally learned to be okay. Over the next few weeks, they fell into a comfortable routine. She'd arrive at the stable on Saturday and Sunday mornings, and he'd already be there, usually in the barn or working in the arena. They'd feed the horses together, clean stalls, prepare for lessons. It was easy working alongside him. He didn't need to fill every silence with conversation, but when they did talk, it was natural and genuine. He was good at his job, she noticed. Really good. Patient with the students, firm but kind with the horses, always focused on safety without making people feel scared. She watched him teach a teenage boy who was nervous about jumping, and the way he built the kid's confidence was something special, not pushing, not coddling, just steady encouragement and clear instruction. One morning, about 3 weeks after they'd met, she mentioned her work at the clinic. She'd had a tough case that week, a woman recovering from a car accident who was struggling with the pain and frustration of physical therapy. He listened while she talked about it, really listened, and when she was done, he asked thoughtful questions. Must be hard, he said. Seeing people in pain like that and knowing the recovery is going to take time. The hardest part is when they want to give up, she admitted. When they don't believe they're going to get better. Sometimes my job is as much about mental strength as physical strength. He nodded. Same with horses and riders. Half the battle is mental, getting people to trust themselves and their horse. A few days later, he mentioned that his shoulder had been bothering him. Old rodeo injury, he explained, rolling it gingerly. Axe up when the weather changes? Rodeo? She was surprised. You didn't mention that. Yeah, I did some bull riding in my 20s. Everyone does stupid things when they're young. He smiled, but she could see the wince behind it. Let me look at it, she offered. It's kind of what I do. They went into the stable office and he took off his jacket. She assessed his shoulder with professional hands, feeling for the muscle tension and checking his range of motion. She could feel the old injury, the way the muscles had compensated over time, creating a pattern of tightness and weakness. You've got significant tension here, she said, pressing gently on a spot that made him inhale sharply. And your rotator cuff is compensating for something. When did you injure it? About 8 years ago. Took a bad fall. They told me to do physical therapy, but ranch work doesn't really allow for taking it easy. Well, you're not on the ranch anymore. You could actually address this properly now. She showed him a few stretches and exercises, explaining what each one did and why it mattered. He watched carefully, asking questions, taking mental notes. Over the next few weeks, he'd ask her about the exercises, making sure he was doing them right. Sometimes after the morning work was done and before lessons started, they'd spend 15 minutes in the barn aisle with him doing the physical therapy routine while she corrected his form. It became part of their routine and she noticed his shoulder improving. You're a miracle worker, he said one morning, rotating his arm with much more ease than he'd had a month ago. This hasn't felt this good in years. Just doing my job. Well, not technically my job since I'm not charging you, but you know what I mean. I owe you big time. How about I teach you some advanced riding techniques? Fair trade. That's how she ended up learning to jump. She'd always been intimidated by it, but with him teaching her it felt manageable. He started small, just poles on the ground, teaching her the position and timing. Then gradually, over weeks, they raised the poles. First 6 inches, then a foot, then higher. You're a natural, he told her one afternoon after she'd cleared a 2-foot jump cleanly. You've got the height advantage. Your long legs make it easier to stay with the horse over the fence. There it was again, her height being an advantage. Something positive. Not too much, just right. They started having lunch together after Saturday lessons. Nothing fancy. Usually just sandwiches from the deli in town that they'd eat sitting on hay bales in the barn. They'd talk about their weeks, share stories from work, discuss the horses and students. Sometimes Margaret would join them, and the three of them would sit together like a little family. He told her more about his life in Wyoming, about growing up with 2 sisters, both of whom were tall like their mother. My mom's about your height, he said casually one day. My sisters are both around 6 feet. It's just normal to me, you know? Tall women. I actually feel weird around really short women, like I'm going to accidentally step on them or something. She laughed, but something inside her shifted. He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most normal thing in the world. Not making a big deal out of it, not fetishizing it, just stating a simple fact about his family. He asked about her family too, and she found herself opening up in ways she usually didn't. She told him about her parents' divorce when she was 10, about her younger brother who lived across the country, about her grandmother who'd passed away 2 years ago and how much she missed her. She sounds like she was special, he said. She was the only person who never made me feel weird about being tall. She was 5'1", but she'd always tell me I got my height from my grandfather's side and that I should be proud of it. Stand tall, she'd say. You've got nothing to apologize for. Smart woman. You should listen to her advice. One Saturday in late October, after a particularly long day of lessons, Margaret suggested they all go into town for dinner. There was a little restaurant she loved, family-owned, with the best homemade pie in the county. They piled into Margaret's truck and drove into town as the sun was setting. The restaurant was cozy and warm, with checkered tablecloths and photos of local families covering the walls. They ordered comfort food, the kind that makes you feel good, and talked about everything under the sun. Margaret told embarrassing stories about him as a kid, and he rolled his eyes but laughed along. She felt included, like part of something bigger than herself. When the pie came, they shared 3 different kinds, passing plates around and stealing bites from each other's slices. It was easy and fun and uncomplicated. No pressure, no expectations, just three people enjoying good food and good company. Walking back to the truck, she and he ended up lagging behind Margaret. The street was quiet, lit by old-fashioned street lamps, and their footsteps echoed on the sidewalk. "Can I tell you something?" he said, his voice quiet. Her heart skipped, but she kept her voice steady. "Sure, I'm really glad I moved out here. I wasn't sure about it at first, leaving the ranch and everything familiar. But being here, working with Aunt Margaret, meeting people like you, it feels right. Like maybe this is where I'm supposed to be. I'm glad you came too," she said honestly. "The stable's better with you here. Margaret's happier. The horses are well cared for," and she hesitated, then continued. "It's nice having a friend who gets it. The horse thing, the need for quiet and space and work that means something." "Yeah," he agreed. "It is nice." They walked in comfortable silence the rest of the way to the truck. When they got back to the stable and she was heading to her car, he called out to her. "Hey, I was thinking, there's a ranch supply store about an hour from here that I need to check out next weekend. Want to come? We could make a day of it, grab lunch, look at horse stuff. No pressure if you're busy." She should have hesitated, should have overthought it, analyzed what it meant, worried about getting hurt again. But instead, she just smiled. "Yeah, that sounds fun. Text me the details." "Will do." Driving home that night, she caught herself smiling at nothing. She wasn't falling in love. She wasn't even sure if this was heading anywhere romantic. But she was happy. Genuinely, simply happy. And after everything she'd been through, that felt like its own kind of miracle. The universe had sent her exactly what she needed. Exactly when she needed it. Not a solution to her loneliness. Not validation of her worth. Just a friend who saw her as a whole person. Someone who didn't make her hide the most interesting thing about her. Someone who made her feel normal in the best possible way. Whatever happened next, whether this friendship stayed a friendship or became something more, she knew she'd be okay. Because she'd finally learned the truth that her grandmother tried to tell her all those years ago. She had nothing to apologize for. She was exactly who she was supposed to be, and that was more than enough. The day they drove to the ranch supply store was perfect. The kind of autumn day where the sky is impossibly blue and the air has that crisp edge that makes everything feel alive. They took his truck, an old Ford that he'd driven out from Wyoming with country music playing softly on the radio. They talked the whole way there. Not about anything deep or serious, just easy conversation. She told him about a funny patient at work who'd tried to do physical therapy exercises while watching a soap opera and kept getting distracted by the drama on screen. He told her about one of the lesson horses who'd figured out how to unlatch her stall door and had been sneaking into the feed room at night. At the supply store, they wandered through aisles of tack and equipment, horse treats and grooming supplies. He needed some new lead ropes and was considering a different style of saddle pad. She found herself enjoying just being there, looking at things, asking questions about equipment she'd never needed before. "What do you think of this one?" he asked, holding up a saddle pad with a Navajo-style pattern. "It's beautiful." "Very you," he smiled at that. "Very me? What does that mean?" "I don't know. Just seems like something you'd pick. Practical but with personality. Not boring." He bought the saddle pad and insisted on buying her a nice pair of riding gloves she'd been eyeing. "Early Christmas present," he said when she protested. "Consider it payment for all the physical therapy you've been giving me." They had lunch at a small diner nearby, sitting in a booth by the window. He ordered a burger and she got a salad, and they split an order of fries that came in a basket big enough to feed 4 people. "Can I ask you something?" he said about halfway through the meal. "And you don't have to answer if you don't want to." Her stomach tightened slightly, but she nodded. "Sure. Margaret mentioned you've been coming to the stable for almost a year now. And in all that time, you've never mentioned dating or a boyfriend or anything. I don't mean to pry, I'm just curious, I guess." She took a sip of her water, considering how much to share. Finally, she decided on honesty. "I was dating for a while. Or trying to. It didn't go well. So I took a break from it. A long break. Bad breakup? Not exactly. More like a series of bad first dates." She surprised herself by continuing. "I went on 10 dates in the span of a few months. All disasters. So I decided to stop looking and just focus on myself for a while." He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Their loss." She looked up at him, expecting to see pity or awkwardness. Instead, he just looked genuinely confused by anyone passing up the opportunity to get to know her. "Can I tell you something?" he said. "My last relationship ended about 2 years ago. We were together for 3 years. She was great, really, but she wanted city life. Wanted me to move to Denver, get an office job, live in a high-rise apartment, and I couldn't do it. Tried to picture it, tried to want it for her, but I couldn't. That must have been hard." It was. But you know what I learned? You can't make yourself smaller to fit into someone else's life. You can't change who you are at your core just to make a relationship work. If it's right, you shouldn't have to. She felt tears prick at her eyes and blinked them back. How did he always say exactly the things she needed to hear? "So we ended it," he continued. "Stayed friends, actually. She's engaged now to some guy who loves the city as much as she does, and I'm here doing what I'm meant to be doing. It worked out the way it was supposed to." They finished lunch and started the drive back. About halfway home, he said something that surprised her. "You know what I noticed the first day we met?" "What?" "How comfortable you were around the horses. How natural. You've got this calm energy that they respond to. Clover trusts you completely. That's not something you can fake or force. It's just who you are." She felt warmth spread through her chest. "That's what you noticed first?" "Yeah. Well, that and the fact that you actually knew how to properly clean a stall. Can't tell you how many people I've met who think they want to work with horses but don't want to do the actual work." He glanced over at her. "Why, what did you think I noticed first?" She almost said it. Almost mentioned her height, made a self-deprecating joke, fell back into old patterns. But she stopped herself. "I don't know. I guess I was just curious." The conversation moved on to other things, but his words stayed with her. He'd noticed her character, her capabilities, her connection with the horses. Not her height. Not any of the things she'd spent so long thinking were the most obvious things about her. That evening at the stable, after they'd unloaded his purchases and were saying goodbye, he hesitated by his truck. "I really enjoyed today," he said. "We should do it again sometime. Maybe check out that tack shop Margaret mentioned about an hour south. I heard they have good deals on winter blankets. I'd like that." "Good. It's a date." He paused, and she saw something flicker across his face. "I mean, not a date unless... if you wanted it to be..." She watched him stumble over his words, this confident cowboy suddenly nervous, and she felt her heart do a little flip. "What are you asking?" she said gently, wanting him to say it clearly. He took off his hat, ran a hand through his hair, then looked at her directly. "I'm saying I like spending time with you. A lot. And if you're interested, I'd like to take you to dinner. An actual date. Not just two friends grabbing food." There it was. The moment she'd been both hoping for and dreading. All those old fears started bubbling up. What if it didn't work out? What if he ended up being like all the others? What if she got hurt again? But then she looked at him. Really looked at him. This man who'd spent weeks getting to know her without any agenda. Who treated her like a whole person, not a height measurement. Who'd shared his own stories of heartbreak and understood what it meant to feel like you didn't fit. Who made her laugh and listened when she talked and never made her feel like she was too much or not enough. "I'd like that," she heard herself say. His face broke into a genuine smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Yeah? Yeah, but I need you to know something first." She took a breath. "I've been rejected a lot for being tall. And I know you've never made it an issue, but I need to know it's really not going to be one. Because I can't go through that again." "I won't." He stepped closer, and she had to tilt her head to look up at him. Even standing this close, he was taller than her. But more importantly, the way he was looking at her made her feel seen in a way she'd never experienced before. "Listen to me," he said, his voice steady and sure. "Where I come from, tall women aren't unusual. My mom is 6'1". My sister is 6 feet. My other sister is 5'11". Growing up, that was just normal. And I'm going to be honest with you about something." He paused, making sure she was really hearing him. "That first day we met, you know what I saw? I saw a woman who was confident with horses, who knew how to work hard, who had kind eyes and a nice smile, who treated my aunt with respect and obviously cared about the animals. That's what I noticed, and over these past weeks I've gotten to know someone who's smart and funny and passionate about her work, who's been through hard things but didn't let them make her bitter, who's genuine and real and exactly herself." He put his hat back on and smiled at her. "Your height? That's just part of the package. A good part, an attractive part, but it's not the whole story. It's not even the most interesting chapter. So no, it's not going to be an issue. I promise you that. She felt tears well up, but this time they were good tears. Happy tears. Tears that came from finally being seen for all of who she was. Okay, she said, her voice a little shaky. Okay then. Let's go to dinner. Saturday night? He suggested. I know a steakhouse about 20 minutes from here. Nothing fancy, but the food's great. Saturday night sounds perfect. They stood there for another moment, just smiling at each other like two people who'd just figured out something important. Then he tipped his hat, got in his truck, and drove away. She sat in her car for a few minutes before starting it, just processing what had happened. She was going on a date, a real date, with someone who knew her, who'd spent time with her, who'd seen her at her most regular and still wanted more. She wasn't scared. She wasn't anxious. She wasn't worried about all the ways it could go wrong. She was just happy, excited, hopeful in a way that felt earned, not desperate. When she got home, she called her best friend. I have a date, she said as soon as her friend picked up. Oh my God, finally. Tell me everything. And she did. She told her about the cowboy and the stable and the past few weeks of getting to know him. About how he made her feel normal and seen and valued. About how he was tall enough that she had to look up at him, but more importantly, how that wasn't even what mattered. He sounds perfect, her friend said. I don't know about perfect, but he might be perfect for me. We'll see. And that was the difference now. She wasn't looking for perfect. She wasn't looking for someone to complete her or validate her or save her from being alone. She was just open to seeing where this could go with someone who seemed genuinely good. Saturday couldn't come fast enough. Saturday came, and she spent way too long deciding what to wear. Not because she wanted to impress him exactly. She already knew he liked her, but because she wanted to feel good, confident, like herself, but the best version of herself. She finally settled on a deep green sweater dress that hit just above her knees and a pair of ankle boots with a small heel. When she looked in the mirror, she stood up straight. No slouching, not anymore. He picked her up at 7, looking handsome in dark jeans and a button-down shirt, his cowboy hat traded for the evening but his boots still on. When she opened the door, he smiled, that genuine smile of his. You look beautiful, he said, and it didn't sound like a line, it sounded like the truth. The steakhouse was exactly as he'd described. Nothing fancy, but warm and welcoming, with exposed brick walls and candles on every table. They were seated in a corner booth, and the conversation flowed as easily as it always did between them, but there was something different about tonight, an electricity in the air, an awareness that this was something new, something more than friendship. They talked about everything, their childhoods, their dreams, their fears. He told her about the ranch his family owned, acres of land with mountains in the distance and sky that went on forever. It's in my blood, he said. But I'm realizing home isn't just a place. It's wherever you feel like yourself. She told him about the 10 dates, about the rejection, about learning to be okay on her own. I spent so long thinking something was wrong with me, she admitted. Like I needed to change or hide or apologize for taking up space. It took a lot of work to unlearn that. He reached across the table and took her hand. It was the first time they'd held hands, and the contact sent warmth through her entire body. I'm glad you unlearned it, he said, because the woman sitting across from me right now, she doesn't need to change a single thing. Dinner stretched into dessert, and dessert stretched into talking so long the restaurant started closing down around them. They finally left, apologizing to the staff, and walked to his truck in the parking lot. The night air was cold and she wrapped her arms around herself. Want to take a drive? He asked. I found this spot last week with an amazing view. If you're not too tired. She wasn't tired at all. She was wide awake, alive in a way she hadn't felt in years. Show me. He drove them out of town, down winding country roads, until they reached a hilltop overlooking the valley. You could see the lights of the town, below scattered like stars, and above them, the actual stars were brilliant in the clear sky. He parked and they got out, leaning against the hood of his truck. This reminds me of Wyoming, he said quietly. The space, the stars, the feeling like the world is bigger than any one person's problems. She looked up at the sky, at the impossible number of stars, and felt small in the best way possible, Not small like she needed to shrink herself, small like she was part of something vast and beautiful. "Can I tell you something?" she said after a while. "Anything. I'm scared. Not of you exactly, but of this, of hoping for something, and having it not work out. I know it's early and we're just starting, but I really like you. And that scares me because the last time I put myself out there, I got hurt. Multiple times." He turned to face her, and in the moonlight his expression was serious but kind. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you," he said honestly. "I'm human. I'll mess up sometimes. But I can promise I'll never make you feel like you're too much, or not enough, or anything other than exactly who you're supposed to be." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "I've been thinking about something," he continued, "about what I want, and I realized I don't want to date around. I don't want casual. I've done that, and it's not for me. When I'm with someone, I'm all in, and I know it's soon, and we can take this as slow as you need, but I want you to know where I stand." Her heart was pounding. This was it. The moment where she had to decide whether to protect herself or take the risk. "I'm all in too," she heard herself say. "I'm terrified, but I'm in." He smiled, and then he did something that made her breath catch. He took both of her hands in his and looked at her like she was the only person in the world. "I see you," he said simply. "All of you. And I like what I see." Then he kissed her. It was gentle at first, tentative, asking permission. When she kissed him back, it deepened and she felt like something was clicking into place, like all the pieces of her life had been scattered and were finally coming together. When they pulled apart, they were both smiling. "I've wanted to do that for weeks," he admitted. "Why didn't you?" "Wanted to make sure you were ready. Wanted to do this right." They stood there on that hilltop for another hour, talking and kissing and planning. He told her about his family, about how much they'd like her. "My mom will love you," he said. "She's going to talk your ear off about horses and give you all my embarrassing childhood stories." "When do I get to meet them?" she asked, and she was surprised to find she actually wanted to. "Christmas?" he suggested. "I'm flying home for a week. You could come with me if you want. No pressure, but the offer's there." She thought about it, meeting his family, going to Wyoming, seeing the place that made him who he was. A few months ago, the idea would have terrified her. Now it just felt exciting. "Let me think about it," she said, "but I'm leaning toward yes." The next few weeks were a blur of happiness. They were official now together, and it felt easy in a way relationships had never felt for her before. They still worked at the stable together, still had their routines, but now there were stolen kisses in the barn and hand-holding during trail rides and long phone calls on weeknights when they weren't together. Margaret was thrilled. "I knew it," she kept saying with a satisfied smile. "I knew you two would be perfect together." Her friends were cautiously optimistic. They'd seen her get hurt before and wanted to make sure this was different. But when they met him at a group dinner, they pulled her aside afterward and said, "Okay, we approve. He's a keeper." In early December, she booked her flight to Wyoming. She was nervous about meeting his family, but he kept reassuring her. "They're going to love you," he said. "And if they don't, which they will, it doesn't change anything between us." The flight was smooth, and he picked her up from the airport in his truck, the same one he'd driven east months ago. As they drove toward the ranch, she watched the landscape change. The mountains rose in the distance, massive and snow-capped. The sky really was bigger here, stretching endlessly in every direction. The ranch was beautiful, rustic and real, with a main house that looked like it had been there for generations. His mom came out to greet them, and she really was tall, nearly as tall as her son. She hugged her nephew first, then turned to her with a warm smile. "So you're the one he won't stop talking about," she said, pulling her into a hug. "It's so nice to finally meet you." His whole family was like that, warm and welcoming and completely unfazed by her height. His sisters were both tall, confident women who teased their brother mercilessly and made her feel included immediately. His father was quiet but kind, and she could see where he got his steady presence from. They spent a week there, and it was one of the best weeks of her life. They went horseback riding across the ranch land, helped with chores, sat around the dinner table with his family telling stories and laughing. She felt like she belonged in a way she'd never quite felt anywhere else. On their last evening there, he took her riding at sunset. Just the two of them, riding across open land with the mountains in the distance turning purple in the fading light. They stopped at a creek and dismounted, letting the horses drink. "I need to tell you something," he said, and there was something in his voice that made her heart skip. "Okay," she said, suddenly nervous. He took both her hands in his, just like he had that night on the hilltop. "I know we've only been together for a few months. I know that's not a long time in the grand scheme of things. But I also know what I want. And what I want is you. Not just for now, for the long haul." She felt tears starting to form but blinked them back, wanting to hear everything he had to say. "When I moved east, I thought I was just helping my aunt, starting over somewhere new. But now I realize I was moving toward something. Toward you. Toward this life we're building together." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking you to marry me right now. I'm not even asking you to say anything back. I just need you to know that when I think about my future, you're in it. Every single version of it." The tears came then, sliding down her cheeks in the golden light of sunset. But they were happy tears. The happiest tears she'd ever cried. "You're in my future too," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I didn't think I'd ever find this. Find someone who made me feel like I didn't have to be anyone but myself. Someone who saw all of me and didn't ask me to be smaller or different or anything other than who I am." He reached up and wiped the tears from her cheeks with his thumbs. "You are exactly who you're supposed to be. And I'm the luckiest man in the world that you're giving me a chance." They stood there by the creek as the sun set completely, the sky turning from gold to pink to deep purple. The horses grazed peacefully nearby, and the only sounds were the water running over rocks and the wind through the grass. "Come here," he said softly, and she stepped into his arms. She fit perfectly there,